Where are we? Now, think about that question in the context of an enterprise. Maybe a startup, maybe a large corporation, doesn't matter. Where are we in relation to the outside world? Well, the picture might be, this is a lovely day, everything's fine, we're in a nice bubble. That would be rather foolish, because actually the world isn't like that. It's full of threats, unexpected, challenging, tigers, sharks, lions, all sorts of things going to come at us. We know this. We know the world is a hostile, turbulent environment. That's of course a rather negative picture. We could turn that on its head and say, where are we? Well, we're not in a bubble, but we do see that in amongst all this set of threats, there are some great opportunities. There's gold at the end of that rainbow. There's something in those hills if we can just climb them. There are opportunities. The key message is, if we're thinking strategically about innovation, then we can't afford to be in a bubble. We have to be aware of what's going on in that outside world and position ourselves and work our strategy around making the best of our situation. So if we're going to be serious about our strategic approach to this outside world, then we need to draw some kind of a map, to have some conversations about what that world looks like, to do some research to explore it in a little more detail. And there's a very simple tool that can help us do that. We want first of all to look out there at the threats and the opportunities. So list them, imagine the very worst in terms of the things that might come at us, as well as the obvious threats, and also look to the future in terms of the potential gold at the end of our rainbows. Threats and opportunities. And we could do two columns, threats and opportunities. The other part of the tool is to say, who are we? We're not just insulated from that outside world, we're players in it. And we have some strengths. We can use that strength to take advantage of that opportunity or to fight off that threat. And we have some weaknesses that make us vulnerable to the threats or which hold us back from exploiting the opportunities. So the second part of our picture that we build, the conversations that we have, as well as threats and opportunities, strengths and weaknesses. Now, of course, rather than thinking generally about threats and opportunities, we might want to be a little more specific. So it would help us in building this picture to have a few dimensions along which we explore, we ask the questions. And a simple tool to help develop our SWOT analysis is an approach sometimes called a PEST or a PESTLE analysis. Very, very simply, they're the first letters of some of the dimensions we might think of. So P is for political. What does the political environment look like? Because that will shape our innovation strengths and weaknesses and threats and opportunities. What's the economic environment? What's the social environment? Public opinion? What's acceptable? What's unacceptable? What is technology doing? The T in the PEST. What does the legal framework say in terms of what we can and can't do? And increasingly relevant, what about the environmental picture? The world of climate change, for example. Now, PESTLE, we can add other dimensions if we want to. They're simply helping us enrich this picture of the threats and opportunities we have to confront and to merge that with what we feel we're strong with and where we have some weaknesses. Now, staying with this picture of building a model of our external environment, where are the challenges, where are the opportunities, essentially this outside-in picture, another very helpful tool is one originally developed by the American economist Michael Porter. And he says we actually need to think in most situations in terms of competition. It's not just us on our own, it's us trying to make it through when we're in competition with others. So he has a model which he talks about in terms of 5 forces. Later on he added a 6th, but essentially the 5 forces are the ones which really are helpful. And he says basically we need to look at the competitive rivalry. So we do need to understand our competitors, what their strengths and weaknesses are, because we're all facing the same threats and opportunities. They may be better or worse placed. So let's look at our competitors. But then crucially, let's look at our suppliers. People give us sell us, provide us with resources with which we can work to deliver our value. And whether that's knowledge resources from universities or other places, or it's financial resources, or it's physical resources, we need those resources. And it's a relationship. How strong are they compared to us? How weak are they? If they're very strong, that's a weakness for us because our room to maneuver in this hostile world is limited. If we're very strong in relation to them, it's quite powerful. We can use them to help us get where we want to go. So looking at the bargaining power, the relative strength of our suppliers is an important part of this force analysis. The other side, of course, is our customers. How strong is their bargaining power compared to us? Are they able to say, we demand this and we have no option if we want to stay serving them but to give it? Or are we the only player in the game and we can begin to call the shots? Again, what is the bargaining power? Now, there's a tension here, but clearly if we understand our position in relation to our suppliers and our customers, that's going to be useful information. Who else might come in the game? The threat of new entrants. If we're in a business where we have lots of patent protection, we've got a very strong appropriability castle, so nobody can really come, we're fairly secure. We can do what we would like to do next. If there are lots of new upstarts coming in, if we've got very weak appropriability protection, then we may have to think about lots of new competitors coming in to join this violent world. And the last of the forces in the 5-force model, what about substitution? What about a completely new way of doing this, or a new technology, something that undermines what we do? That was partly the Kodak challenge, a completely new technology, digital imaging. Even though they actually knew about it, it wasn't enough. That substitution changed the rules of the game. Now, the point about this is, once again, it's a set of questions. It doesn't give us answers, but it gives us places to do the research, to do the exploring, to help us build a rich picture of how we are going to play in this hostile environment. Now, there are many other tools we can also use to help us build this picture of what's going on out there and how we could play in relation to it. We've already seen one of them, the 4 Ps analysis that we saw in an earlier module when we looked at exploring the innovation space. Remember, we can change what we offer the world, our products or our services. We can change the processes we use to create and deliver those. We can change our position in the marketplace and the story we tell to the market. And we can change the overall paradigm, the way in which we play our game. Now, that defines a kind of space a bit like an innovation compass. And it allows us to think both about doing what we do better and radical innovation, doing something completely different. That's a very helpful map if we're exploring for the future strategy in terms of how we might play and where we might play in this hostile, turbulent environment. Another similar kind of tool is an approach called the blue ocean strategy. And this uses a rather useful metaphor. If you take a piece of meat and throw it into a sea full of sharks, it won't be long before all those sharks come together, trying to get at the pieces of meat. And very quickly the water becomes very turbulent and the blood is everywhere. It's a red ocean and not a place we want to go swimming in. It's a powerful metaphor for the kind of competitive place we don't want to spend time in if we can avoid it. By contrast, a blue ocean is a calm, quiet piece of ocean where there is no competition. And the challenge in the blue ocean model is to say, could we search our environment, look in a particular way to find places where there isn't so much competition, where perhaps there are new rules of the game? It's another of the many tools we have available to us to help us identify where we might play out there. Now, in the same spirit of tools that can help us explore and identify where we might play and where we might play well in this environment, another approach is called benchmarking. And benchmarking is simply a systematic comparison. How much taller or faster or straighter, that's kind of systematic comparison where we put some measures in place. And benchmarking typically might take a competing organization and say, well, of the things that we're offering the world and they're offering the world, they're similar, but theirs is cheaper, or theirs is better in terms of quality, or it has more features. It's a systematic comparison. or look at our process innovation, the way in which we create and deliver whatever we do compared to how they do it. The point about benchmarking is the more information we can get about how they, the competition, do it in different ways, the more we can see the gaps, the more we can identify where there might be opportunities or where the fact that they are so much further ahead means there's a real threat and we have to catch up. So benchmarking, another set of tools which help us build this external map. Now, one aspect of the environment that we haven't considered yet in building this rich picture of the threats and opportunities is the time dimension. And after all, strategy isn't just about tomorrow, it's very much about the future. So what we need to do now is also think about tools that can help us look at the future. Once again, there are plenty to help us. In particular, many tools are built around the concept of scenarios. Science fiction pictures of what the future might look like. Not just one or two trends, a technology or a market, but put them together. What will the world look like? And the beauty of scenarios and those kinds of tools is they give us a picture of the future which we can then work backwards from. So we can do, instead of forecasting, looking ahead, we can also do backcasting. So we can then do some mapping of what do we have to start doing today in order to get us to that gold at the end of the rainbow, or to make sure we're well placed to deal with that emerging threat. So again, plenty of useful tools in the futures part of our toolbox. Now, another element associated with this time dimension is, of course, that things change over time. And that's particularly true in terms of technologies, which are a key part of our approach to innovation. What we can do, of course, is to look at the way technologies change over time. And they follow one of our favorite S-curves. And essentially, very early, a new technology is invented, and it takes a while to mature, and then it becomes the dominant model. It gets better and better, and may be in place for a long time, but eventually falls to a kind of plateau. It reaches its limits, and a new technology comes along and repeats the process. So we have a series of overlapping S-curves. And that can be very helpful if we're trying to look at threats and opportunities into the future. Can we see when our current technology is perhaps getting very mature and running out of steam? Can we see where the new one, which is still a glimmer at the moment, but is going to grow and become the dominant thing? And can we make sure our strategy moves us to jump these S-curves in the right way? So let's summarize where we've been in this film. We need to look outside and explore a hostile and turbulent environment and identify where we might play, where are the threats and opportunities, and build on our strengths and manage our weaknesses. There are plenty of tools to help us do so. The limit, however, is, of course, it's not just about where we'd like to position ourselves in this outside world. We can explore an outside viewpoint, an outside-in viewpoint, but we also need to think about our competences and our capabilities inside to actually work in that environment. So as well as an outside-in approach that we've explored in this film, we also need to look at an inside-out approach to work alongside it. But let's now open the toolbox and have a play with some of these tools.